In strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNewsGlobal. I'm Amitabh, Revi, and you're watching our daily flagship show, The Gist. Joining us from Colombo live and welcoming all the viewers who are watching us live. There'll be, of course, viewers who I can welcome now and watch this stream later. Is Ashraf Haidari. He's the ambassador of Afghanistan to Sri Lanka. He's been the deputy chief of mission in India for over 3 years, the deputy chief of mission of the Afghan embassy in Washington. He's been a deputy assistant NSA as well in Afghanistan and the DG of policy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Afghanistan. Ambassador Haidari, glad you could give us some time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Ambassador Haidari, first of all, I want to talk about Afghans who are going through over 40 years of suffering now. There may be some kind of a change in governance because of the Taliban sweeping to power, but we've seen those pictures of people trying to get out, be evacuated, people dying, falling off planes. Apart from that, the IDPs, there are over 300,000 now currently in Afghanistan, and not even counting those who are in Pakistan and Iran.
Yes, thank you so much for beginning your show, unlike so many others, with asking about the plight of Afghan internally displaced people, the plight of Afghan refugees around the world, and the enormous suffering imposed, unfortunately, on the people of Afghanistan. The numbers are a lot more than 300,000. There are 5 million protracted and recent internally displaced people, unfortunately, exposed to the extremes of the weather conditions and as well as climate change without food, shelter, water, and the images, as you are showing, are grim. It's tragic. And also a large number of Afghans have poured out of our borders into neighboring states and onward to Europe, wherever they can find safety, security, protection, and freedoms, especially the freedoms that now they have lost and are fast being deprived of. So we call on the international community to deliver on their commitments tangibly in order to meet these humanitarian appeal launched by the United Nations for 1.3 billion, but I think that's not enough, although only 30% of this appeal has been met. And so there is an opportunity right here, not only for our own neighborhood, but for the rest of the international community to step up to the plate, to do more, to help meet this appeals call for increased humanitarian assistance to assist those thousands of Afghans, not just in Kabul, unfortunately, who have ended up on the streets and the parks, but throughout Afghanistan because of the recent violent offensives.
We're talking about the violence offensive. Everybody wanted a reduction in violence, a ceasefire. Because the Taliban has swept to power, there seems to be, in terms of, there is fear, there is uncertainty, people want to get out. But in terms of violence, it seems to have, there's no fighting as such. There may be looting. But it's very surreal, Ambassador Haidari, when we see those pictures, Mullah Baradar reaching Kandahar. He's on his way, or at least there's a Emirates team that is on its way to Kabul. The first press conference, the first time on camera, we're seeing the spokesperson, Zabiullah Mujahid, for over 20 years. That's the name that we've heard. We didn't even know whether it was successive spokespeople. But what do you feel when you see those images?
Well, it's unfortunate. These images speak to the betrayal of the Afghan people, the betrayal of democracy, freedom, human rights, human rights, which we have achieved over the past 20 years with the support of the international community. Uh, so a lot of events are happening these days. We are hearing assurances from the Taliban, a general amnesty, but unfortunately, we have at the same time seen that much of what the leadership have been saying, beginning from Doha or just recent days, have not necessarily materialized on the ground. That the reports show that unfortunately women have been stopped from going to school, universities, and other instances they've been asked to cover from head to toe, something that, of course, is not Islamic. In Islam, it's only a job and a moderate way that the people of Afghanistan are culturally used to, and even before the arrival of the Taliban, and still under the Islamic Republic, consistent with the constitution of Afghanistan, which is underpinned by Islam, they were used to. And so a lot is happening, but it remains to be seen how
Yeah,
this will unfold with implications for the region, with implications for the rest of the world.
true.
Unfortunately, people don't feel safe. They're panicking, they're worried. There's lots of uncertainty as to what would happen to them and their future.
Right. I just want to take in a couple of comments from our viewers, Ambassador, and I'm curious about this as well. Rekha Pai says, is the ambassador still recognized as the ambassador? And Varun Pratap, who goes on to say, the old regime is recognized worldwide. As long as that is not changed, the ambassador still gets recognition. What is the position? I mean, when this transition is happening, are you in touch with anybody in Kabul? Do you get instructions? How does it work?
Absolutely. We are still the internationally recognized Afghan state and Afghan government because, of course, we are the ones who have always complied and obeyed international laws and conventions on the one hand, but also even during the recent offensives, one of the advantages that the Taliban had was to use human shields in gross violation of human rights and other international laws. Absolutely, we are the government of Afghanistan, recognized by the international community, and that's why they have been repeatedly saying that. And I've been saying even before the Taliban captured Kabul that they would not be recognized if they, forcefully capture and try to take over power. But right now, there are lots of conditions that they have to meet, and that includes the formation of an inclusive government that, of
Sure.
course, all Afghans' voices are represented, and all Afghans increasingly feel safe and secure, and building on the achievements of the past 20 years.
I want you to elaborate on that, but has there been any, you saying you're in touch with Kabul, it's still early days, but has anybody from the Taliban side been in contact, maybe not with you, but with ambassadors around the globe, or how does it work?
No, we are mostly in touch with our colleagues around the world, and as well as the foreign minister, and that's where things stand.
Right. Just taking some, you were talking about an inclusive government, but just before I get to that, again, surreal pictures when we saw, Zabiullah Mujahid, we don't really know whether that's a nom de Goa or his real name, taking that press conference in almost the same chair as where Menapal, the GMIC chief, sat, a week before, and the Taliban took responsibility for killing him. There were lots of questions that were asked there, including inclusive government, women's role. I think about Menapal itself, where it was brushed aside as collateral damage. Not only that, but civilian killings when they were asked. What was your reaction when you saw the Taliban team there giving that press conference to journalists?
Well, I wasn't really following, but I did hear again words of assurance on women's rights, on human rights issues, but they always ended up saying within the limits of
Sharia.
what they would define, and also their Sharia is not really, one that is accepted not just under the Islamic Republic, but also in the distant past, even before the advent of the conflicts, before the Soviets invaded Afghanistan.
Mhm.
Remember that Islam in Afghanistan is very much immersed in our cultures and traditions and ancient civilization, because Afghanistan's history dates back 5,000 years ago when others didn't exist. Well, we've been around. We've also been around through many downs in the history, and this is
And you
unfortunately
will
the
be
latest
around
one.
for centuries.
But exactly, but we have also had many ups, and so unfortunately we will see how everything will evolve and unfold. The events we just saw in Jalalabad, where some people just in its
The flag.
expression of their feelings were carrying the flag of Afghanistan, which has been around for you know uh, uh, almost a century, is something that the Afghan people identified themselves as one of the pieces of our national identity as an Afghan. Oh, yeah, emblems have sometimes have changed, but the flag itself, the three colors, have always been the same. So the Taliban unfortunately failed to respect that, and as a result, they resorted to firing into
Hmm.
basically a crowd of civilians. So that shows, the practice on the ground versus what people say at the podiums or behind the mics. That's why,
Exactly.
and we are not alone saying this. I think the rest of the international community, the UN Secretary General said that, of course, as a spokesperson. I did an interview yesterday, and he was asked the same question as one that you just asked me, and he basically echoed the same words that all
Hmm.
I've been hearing are good statements, and those statements are based on talking points that are given to them, and they just utter those talking points. But the
But
reality
it,
on the ground is
but
different. They really need to demonstrate and prove.
sure, absolutely. But it's well curated, well planned in terms of the pictures, the message that they are giving out. Apart from the military sweep that they had, when you were talking about inclusive government, now how do you read what, say, the former first Vice President Amarullah Saleh tweeted yesterday? He's in Panjshir with Amitabh Masood's son. When he tweets saying that he is, according to the constitution, the acting president, i- is there some kind of resistance that is building up? And I want to take some question which reverberates that. Aman Saini, who says, what does the ambassador think of Saleh as president, and resistance from the Panjshir, the ex-Northern Alliance? And then there is Krishna Char, who says, do Ahmed Masood and Amrullah Saleh enjoy popular support among Afghans outside their stronghold? Your comments, Ambassador Haidari.
So it's not a matter of issue of the Northern Alliance. He speaks very constitutionally, and that's what the Constitution says. And the Constitution is still very much current and accepted, unless it is reformed under some kind of arrangement. And the Islamic Republic is internationally recognized, which we discussed a while ago. As a result, so he's claimed his rightful role now as the caretaker of the government since the former president left. As a result, what he has put out publicly constitutionally is correct.
Right. Again, when you're talking about inclusive government, what are your thoughts on your former boss? Do I call him ex-President Ghani, who fled with some of his closest members, the former NSA, Mohib, and Fazeh Fazli, the close aide of his. What are your thoughts on that? And what are your thoughts on, of all people, Anas Haqqani meeting former President Karzai, Dr. Abdullah in Kabul today. I think he met the chairman of the Walesi Jirga as well.
Well, so much has happened that it's hard to really know the details of. But one can say safely that if the president at the state and really cooperated with the former president Hamid Karzai, and I think they had reached an understanding based on an interview that the former president did with BBC, that a day before the president left, they had agreed that the following day they would receive a delegation from Doha, and then that they would discuss an arrangement for the transfer of power, where they would first establish an interim administration and then use that period or lifetime of that administration to discuss the more fundamental issues of concern and interest on both sides, and that would then form the basis of an inclusive government that would represent different views and ethnic groups in Afghanistan, so that the end product would be one that would reassure the Afghan people that Afghan people would find their voice and their rights and their secure future in such an arrangement, and that therefore that would help ensure sustainable peace and security in Afghanistan.
So do you think they've learned their lessons in terms of having inclusive government? Because of the military sweep, and many, I think, leaders from the Taliban would say, we've won, why do we have to include anybody else?
Well, I hope so. I mean, Afghanistan is a pluralistic society. We take pride in our diversity. We should have done more under the president who left to find unity and diversity, and should have really avoided any gaps, unfortunately, that helped the Taliban exploit in support of their offensives. And so the Taliban must have observed, not just since they emerged, were created back in 1994, but even before that, that no one group in a multi-ethnic country can and should rule at the cost of the rest, because that would be a basis for instability on the long run. And so far the Taliban, it seems to me that they've understood. They haven't really outright declared the emirate. They've been talking about it, but they're still waiting. And as a result, you see the meetings happening with the former president, with the chairman of the High Council for National Reconciliation, Dr. Abdullah. And it remains to be seen to what extent they would come around and listen to this, coordination council, which also includes the leader of Hizb Islami, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar.
Yeah, that is true. I just come to that question from Captain Dr. Harinder Singh, Army veteran, who asked, what's the status of the Indian Sikh and Hindus stuck in the Kabul Gurdwara Sahib? Have they been evacuated? Well, that probably the Indian government would be able to answer that question, unless Ambassador Haidari has some information on that. I had seen those appeals from the Gurdwara, and the Indian government has issued statements that it is aware and is trying to move any civilians, not only Hindus and Sikhs, Afghans who are of Indian origin, but Afghans themselves who want to get out. There may be commercial flights, we are told, of Air India and maybe Qatar Airways that could be used. But on the front of the Taliban, Ambassador, we've all known that the problem lay on the other side of the Durand, and that was something that the US never tackled, or the world never tackled. How do you see Pakistan's involvement in what has happened over the last 2 years, but especially over the last week?
Well, the first question is also very important. I wouldn't
Absolutely.
really label Sikhs or Hindus in terms of their faith, their as
No,
valued
absolutely. I was just talking
Afghans
about the passport
as
they held.
yes, as any other Afghans who are panicking and feel threatened. So I would urge the government of India to provide, blind support to any groups of Afghans who feel threatened and who, feel to get out if they wish to do so. So I encourage an, open door policy consistent with international humanitarian law and international human rights law, including refugee law. With India having been, a major contributor on global
Yeah.
stage as one of the largest democracy in the world. So that responsibility is there not just on India, but the rest of the region, including Muslim countries themselves. Because remember, Prophet
Hmm.
Muhammad, peace be upon him, he migrated from Mecca to
To
Medina,
Medina.
but he has to escape, fear and persecution. As a result, of refugee law has roots in Islamic law, and so it's not just shouldn't be India and others alone to look after Afghan refugees, but also the Muslim countries, including the wealthy ones in the region. That said, of course, the elephant in the room, unfortunately, has always been part of the problem. Unfortunately, and that's because of a narrow definition of national security.
Yeah.
Well, I think it has always been and will be in the beast long term of national security of every one of our neighbors, including Pakistan, to help Afghans um, stabilize the country and to let them exercise full sovereignty without any efforts to influence the Afghan politics. Because just by default, we as a landlocked country rely on the peace and prosperity of our neighborhood. There can be no peace and prosperity in Afghanistan if Pakistanis were suffering, if Iranians were suffering, if Central Asians were suffering. So our geography of connectivity would not only help us, but also the rest of the region. And that would happen when the totality of the Afghan population contributes to that. That not half of our population, now women who are extremely worried, would be confined to their homes and not given an opportunity to, go to university, finish university, and then actively participate in the Afghan polity, economy, and society, and thereby, uh, you know, helping
Sure.
Afghanistan on our own, as well as making similar contributions to the rest of the region. So it's really hard to imagine how, half of Afghanistan could enable us to develop on a sustainable basis and make the kind of contributions that each of our neighbors should naturally expect. Definitely Pakistan, because we share a long border with them. So that's why the former president uh, and as well as President Ghani, who left, have made probably more trips to Pakistan, trying to
Sure.
convince them to be constructive, to let Afghanistan be on our own and let us, stand on our own, because doing so is in their best long-term interest, and that working through proxies, working through non-state actors, could buy them short-term influence, but would cost them at the end of the day, if not sooner, later. And I think we've seen that in the past.
Sure. But given the developments that have happened, how much influence or control do you think Pakistan, the deep state, ISI, Rawalpindi, GHQ have over the Taliban that are in power in Afghanistan now? Or do you see parts of the Taliban trying to show their independence?
Well, you can ask them, and I think you as an Indian would know that better than we do. But I could confirm that without external support and support from our neighborhood, the Taliban would not have been able to resist and continued their offensives over the past 3 months. That without external support, the Taliban could have fallen apart in probably less than 3 months in the face of fierce defense of Afghanistan by our brave forces, who I often credit for having relentlessly defending Afghanistan over the past 20 years against not just the Taliban, but so many other terrorist networks from the region and outside, as a result, having given over 70,000 lives and probably hundreds of thousands of limbs, and leaving so many families orphan, children's orphan, and their wives and sisters widowed. And so that externality was there, and without that externality, the Taliban could have never even survived, could have never even reconstituted to begin with after their fall in 2001. So there was a massive state infrastructure behind their reconstitution, behind their redeployment, and behind their consistent and relentless support to take ground, to kill, to terrorize, to unfortunately destroy much of the infrastructure, much of the state building achievements that we have had. I think when we had the statistics just about like a month ago in the recent offensives that destroyed over 300 state institutions, which means leaving people in rural areas without any kind of services. A total breakdown of the state institutions at the local level, and the impact on the humanitarian crisis that I was just talking about. So we have humans, unfortunately, such short-term memory that we have already forgotten about the over $1 billion plus worth of destruction and damages that they have already caused, and people have already moved on and don't talk about it. I do, because I know what how that has caused and expanded this complex humanitarian crisis, simply leaving people without anything, like I described at the beginning.
So, like you're saying, Ambassador, the whole world, and especially most importantly, Afghans themselves, have a microscope on what the Taliban is doing, whether they will keep to their word. But what is your opinion or analysis of what India should be doing currently? I mean, now we have moved all our diplomats out there, Afghan staff who are still there, who are helping with consular activity. I don't know how successful that will be. India's role so far, and how you see it in the short-term future and long-term future.
I think India knows exactly the different ways in which it could continue supporting Afghanistan. Humanitarian being one, like I pointed out, helping meet some of the appeal assistance that I pointed out on the one hand. On the other hand, maintain an open door policy towards any Afghans, including our Sikh and Hindu brothers and sisters, and as well as other Afghans. And also, and third, just support an inclusive process that is being now worked out, that would produce such an inclusive outcome that is not just a name, but one that is really meaningful, one that is really genuine, that it is really a representative government. Now that the situation has happened, it needs to end such that it would really ensure sustainable peace and security, because the Afghan people have suffered for too long. And I think if the key actors, including India and this region, now I talk about the all the CEO member states, China, Russia, India, Pakistan, and
Central
the
Asia.
rest, and as well as, of course, Iran as an observer in Afghanistan. Hopefully, we will also join. We've always been interested in being a member state of SCO. So here is an opportunity for all SCO members, including India, to push for the success of this outcome, that the outcome is really meaningfully representative, and with a focus on consolidating the achievements of the past, especially when it comes to human rights and women's rights and other social freedoms, and then going about, if that happens, then of course the totality of the Afghan population, men and women, would be engaged in helping Afghanistan stand on our own, and thereby making a notable contributions, as I pointed out, to the rest of the region and to the rest of the world. Would that materialize? I think yes, provided that our neighbors, and particularly the SCO member states, that's now inclusive, as I said, really commit the political will. It's one thing that they could cling on their geostrategic interests and rivalries that have unfortunately cost us definitely for first and foremost. We've seen that over the past 40 years and 20 years and more recently, but also would cost them on the long run, because if the purpose is really, say, what President Xi of China has often said, to create a community of shared future, and India has had similar ideas of connectivity for shared prosperity. And so then you see that there is a convergence or commonality of interest by the bigger neighbors of Afghanistan. And if you listen to Pakistani, if you listen to Iranians, if you listen to Russians, and as well as Central Asians, and recall just recently that before these events unfolded, the government of Uzbekistan, I don't know if you attended that conference or not.
Connectivity.
Conference on regional connectivity. And just 1 or 2 days before that, the SCO foreign ministerial meeting happened. And from there, most of the foreign ministers went to the conference on regional connectivity, because in the SCO meeting, they mostly discussed concerns with regards to terrorism and criminality and drug trafficking, in which they said that these threats unfortunately impede cooperation on connectivity. And then they went to Uzbekistan and discussed exactly that, with a focus on Afghanistan. And the consensus that emerged there were that we should all work together to help stabilize Afghanistan. And that's something that they
make it the crossroads again between South Asia and Central Asia and going on. Like you're saying, Ambassador, I think it'll be, everybody is watching and seeing how the Taliban will react. They say they want to develop Afghanistan, but go ahead.
The Taliban are there, but the actors that I just discussed with those interests and the consensus that they often come up and agree on at the table needs to be shared, and it needs to be enforced through incentives and disincentives. And of course, the Taliban would have then be left with no choice but to cooperate, because at the end of the day, the Taliban also, are talking about helping Afghanistan to stabilize and helping bring prosperity and reduce poverty and on and on and on, then they should also listen and go along.
Sure.
So there isn't a shortage and lack of consensus on all these issues. It's just a matter of from the SCO member states on the one hand, from the Taliban on the other hand, and continued support from the West, particularly the United States, to condition their support on these issues which I discussed, and together we can move Afghanistan forward. And as a result, of course, the Taliban should cut ties with terrorist networks and terrorist groups, including with ETIM, which is intent on attacking China, and right now is sheltered by the Taliban in northeast of Afghanistan. And I hope that they're not just waiting for an opportunity to infiltrate into China, with the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan is not doing the same to get an opportunity to attack Tajikistan or Uzbekistan and the rest of Central Asia, including Russia, using the Afghan territory. So the Taliban has a lot to show practically, and they can do so. If they do so, then I think the Afghans will come around, and the international community will come around, and we will see peace and security in Afghanistan with foremost our interests served, and then the interests of the region and the rest of the world. Whether that would happen, I think that the ball is now squarely, completely in the Taliban's court. Now, they have it, governance, they have to deliver, and as we speak, they should stop these home searches. They should, stop firing into civilian crowds. They should allow people to simply express, because that's what Afghans are used to, not just because of the past 20 years, simply because democracy was imposed from outside, which I reject. Why? Because Afghans is a mountainous country, much like the Swiss, are naturally egalitarian and centrifugal. Democracy is the best form of government for mountainous people like Afghans, who are naturally, autonomy seeking. And as a result, they should understand that, internalize that, and do away with this, authoritarian and totalitarian approaches to governance and rule of law, because it's going to backfire and it's going to undermine them. So
Absolutely.
the more they adapt to the Afghan culture, the Afghan identity, to the way Afghans are, the way Afghans have, especially the new Afghanistan, to be honest, and the more they would succeed together with the rest of Afghanistan and the rest of this region and the rest of this international community. And that's basically allowing Afghans to enjoy the same socioeconomic freedoms and facilities, basically a basic peaceful life as the rest of this region, as people in Pakistan do, as people in the Middle East do. And look at Emirates. Look at Doha itself, where the Taliban had been enjoying months and months of, the stay to discuss peace.
True.
So let's look around us in the Muslim countries and give Afghans the same opportunities, the same facilities, the same, access to thrive.
Sure. No, who would know, Ambassador, even a week or 10 days back, that we would be discussing something like this? But we really do appreciate your time and your experience in these tumultuous and transitional times. Thank you so much for speaking to StratNews again.
Thank you so much for having me on your great show. Always a pleasure.
And just a reminder to our viewers, if you're not a subscriber, do click that bell icon on YouTube to get our subscription numbers up, and do follow us on social media. This is The Gist on StratNewsGlobal. I'm Amitabh Revi.